Greetings from Seattle, Washington, in the great Pacific Northwest. I'm Jason Rigdon, and you are listening to the podcast of Mystery, the show that always leaves you with more questions than answers, the podcast where I talk with extraordinary guests about the paranormal, the strange, and the unknown. On this episode, I will be talking with Brain Platt of Seattle's own Mechanical Freak podcast. They will be talking to us about the Giza Death Star and the strange world of Joseph P. Farrell. But first, I've got this quick message. Did you know that the number one way folks discover new podcasts is through word of mouth? If you like this episode, would you please consider telling a friend about the podcast A Mystery? I'm not shilling food buckets or shitty supplements yet, so I don't have money to waste on social media advertising. I depend on my listeners to spread the word about this weird little show. Hopefully, this show is good enough to earn your recommendation. If it is, would you please take a moment and think about who in your life would like a show like this? Who do you know that likes the paranormal and Fortean stuff? Why not tell them about the podcast of Mystery? If you like the show, please tell a friend.
My name is Brain Platt. I am one of the co-hosts of the Mechanical Freak podcast, formerly Seattle Sucks. And I'm here to talk about the cosmic war that's been raging for millennia on this planet, and I think we're going to find other planets as well.
Well, thank you so much for joining us and kind of sharing this very strange story. So, how does this all work?
Well, so this is the thesis of a man named Joseph Farrell, who is a character that you find on the internet when you've been on the internet too long, and I'd like to maybe start with in one of his interviews. He has this great starting point where he talks about how in 2003, after the invasion of Iraq, of course, the Museum of Ancient Artifacts in Baghdad was looted. One of the many horrific crimes of that war perpetrated by the United States. But in the looting, Joseph Farrell says, he says this is not a simple war crime or anything like that. Rather, somebody was looking for something. And wouldn't you know it, who was keeping the ledger of all the artifacts in that museum but the Germans?
Ooh.
Cue the music.
Yes.
Dun, dun, dun. All right. So, in essence, what he's arguing is there's been a multi-millennia battle going back maybe as far as 30,000 years, where alien-human hybrids have been fighting over the lost technology of a superior alien civilization that once occupied the Earth, the Moon, Mars, a fourth planet between Mars and Jupiter, as well as several of Saturn's moons. And, we'll get into the details, but the long and the short of it was there was a war 30,000 years ago in which the Great Pyramid, which you might think is some sort of funerary tomb, it's actually a laser, fired off at the fourth planet, blew it up, and this was the sort of penultimate event of that, part of the war. In the process of this, a bunch of this technology was lost or destroyed, or how to use it was lost. And for thousands of years now, the alien descendants have been trying to get a hold of this technology and rebuild it from the ground up. So I think that's pretty clear. Do you have any questions about this, Jason?
Yeah, my number one question is, how did you come across this story?
Very good question. So, when I was a kid, this would have been I'm 39 now, so this is in the 1980s. Like many kids in the late 80s, early 90s, I got very into aliens, and I very specifically remember at a half-price books going to get comic books one day and coming out with Eric von Daniken's Chariot of the Gods, being very into it. Moving from that to Bud Hopkins' Missing Time was another very important book about alien abductions. So I was very much an aliens guy, right? As a kid. And then, I went to college. I left childish things behind. September 11th happened. The war in Iraq happened. And doing sort of anti war protests and stuff, being in the anti war movement, I kept coming across, and trust me, this is a very long way around to Joseph Farrell, kept coming across 9/11 truthers, right? And finding them to be largely a distraction and their theories to be quite frankly silly. We don't need to get into that though. I found myself sort of arguing with them a lot because I was in Texas at the time, which is the home of Alex Jones and the Alex Jones radio show, which has many adherents. And I just were getting these kind of pointless debates. Then I moved to Seattle in probably about 2006, 2007. Like everybody who moves here, I was very lonely and bored. So I just decided, well, I'll go do anti-war stuff, and why not just keep arguing with the weird, the weird 9/11 people? Why not, right? And so I decided, well, I'll just be more aggressive about it. I will confront them online, in person, all this kind of stuff, right? Not like in a mean way. I wasn't like hunting them down to like yell at them or whatever, but I was really getting into talking to these people. And in the process of doing this, I was introduced to a completely awful internet, definitely in major quotes, documentary called Zeitgeist, and then its sequel, Zeitgeist Addendum,
Yep.
which both of which you sound like you might be familiar.
Oh yeah, I remember someone at an anti-war protest handing them out,
Yep.
I believe.
Yep.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I think I still have my burned CD,
Yeah, yeah,
not DVD, mind you. I had to play it on my computer.
yeah, yeah. Wasn't it like a SVCD or a Super Video CD? It was like
Yeah.
a weird format.
Yeah. Definitely whatever the cheapest format you could get and burn it
Yes.
onto. It's also each film, if you want to call it that, Zeitgeist and then Zeitgeist. They're both like 3 hours long a piece, right? So
Oh wow.
yeah,
Okay.
they're I mean, just amazingly boring and very long. So naturally, I watched both of them multiple times. And what Zeitgeist did was this really interesting thing. See, I was one of those nerds who was arguing with 9/11 truthers, on the dumb, line of like, whether or not steel has to melt to fail and all this kind of stuff. I was sitting here arguing on the science, but I didn't realize that there was a whole sort of this like arcane underbelly that had this whole kind of spiritual element to it that was very new, like new age, really like 70s new agey, a little sci-fi, and Zeitgeist captures all of that, right, appropriately since its title, right. And so Zeitgeist is broken up into three sections. The first one is all about how, hey man, do you know that this whole Jesus guy, that's actually borrowed from other religions, man. So this is like very dorm room freshman like conversation. They get almost all the facts of it wrong, although, it is certainly true that syncretism is real and that religions are built on the back of other religions. Hilariously, my favorite thing was they say that, like, look, uh, gods like Horus and stuff are the sun god, and Jesus is God's son. Right. And then they put the words together and they're like, son, God. And I'm like, they weren't speaking modern English, right?
I see that a lot.
Yeah, it's very fascinating. So it has that. Then like has a middle section that's basically just rehashing loose change, which is also a bad documentary. Nobody should take it seriously. And then it has a third section that's literally just the protocols of the elders of Zion, right, about Jewish banking.
Wow.
And s and so it really introduced me to I had kind of I kind of believed at the time that some of these conspiracy theories that were kind of rife in the anti-war movement were just because like, oh, you don't get a very clean narrative of what happened on 9/11, right? Obviously things are being, withheld or magnified for the purposes of the war. It's, hard for people that weren't there to explain just how insane the war fever was at the time and how lockstep the media was on promoting it. And and I hadn't quite realized that there's this greater cosmology, right? That's undergirding a lot of this. And so in the process of sort of delving into that, going into the internet and trying to figure out why all these people cared so much about the history of ancient religions, why the protocols were showing back up again, and Jewish banking conspiracies were showing back up again, not realize at the time that they're always there, like when you delve into this world, that this is always omnipresent. But I ran into a guy named Joseph Farrell, and you know, I had been kind of a coast to coast listener, like in high school and stuff like that, for fun and everything like that. So I found all these podcasts that Joseph Farrell had done on this show called The Bite Show, which is hosted by an extremely elderly evangelical. And it is as hilarious as you could imagine that podcast would be in like 2007, in that they constantly hang up the phones on each other and then reconnect, on the show. They're all like 3 hours long. Um, they are just hilariously even more scattered than this story I'm telling you that's taken 20 minutes just to get to, even more scatterbrained than that. And I don't know why, but I just became addicted. And there was like maybe 30 hours of these just sitting there waiting for me. And I was like, give it to me. And I was just at the time I was working as a machinist. I was working night shift. I was by myself, right? I had my headphones in. I was just injected into my veins. Just give it to me. And that's how I discovered Joseph Farrell and the Cosmic War.
Yeah. Okay. So going back to the Cosmic War, how many alien species is he talking about here?
Okay, good question. So there's at least two, but could be upwards of four or five, right? So he's constantly kind of shifting around on this, but there is very clearly at least two sides that are actively participating in the war, and maybe a couple that are sort of monitoring, right? And the two sides actively participating, so this is where it gets a little, difficult, actually might be the same race of alien, just different factions within it, right? And so the basic premise is these aliens had a home planet, which is between Mars and Jupiter. That planet was much larger than the Earth, right? So maybe closer. I think he says something like two-thirds the size of Jupiter. Because of the planet's size, the alien race that was on it was much taller. Now, I don't know about the evolutionary facts of the matter in this case. He seems to think if the planet has higher gravity, the people will be taller.
Hmm.
I don't think that's true. I'm not a
Yeah.
biologist.
You think they'd be stronger? Like they would be like Superman, maybe like where they had
Yeah.
it would be just be okay to they'd be able to lift like maybe more weight than we could.
Yeah, but would definitely be squatter, I think. But,
Yeah, I feel like yeah.
I'm not a biologist though, Jason. I don't know if you are, but it doesn't make sense to me, but that's okay. So, fourth planet, it's very big, has big, higher gravity, so the people are taller. um, they also, and this will come in later because there's some like this is gonna go to a dark place later, but we'll stay on the light side here. They typically had blonde hair or red hair. They also had double rows of teeth, which is
Double.
double, yeah. Which,
Wow.
according to Joseph, shows that they're cannibals, or at least engaged in some light
Of
cannibalism.
course.
Again,
Yeah.
not a biologist. I, can't speak to the factual nature of that. But so they spread out. They have very advanced technology. Joseph says that they essentially it's a mixture of, and I'm just going to rattle some stuff off here. I don't know if this is real science. I strongly suspect that it either is not, or if it is, I don't think Joseph has a real handle on it. But please, nobody email me about asking what any of this is. But they have they have these a special grasp on these special physics that Joseph is very obsessed with, which is quaternion geometry,
Oh, I love it.
the physics of vorticular mechanics, and scalar physics, right? Now,
Oh, yeah.
the only one of those that rang any bell to me was scalar physics, because a scalar is literally just a magnitude without a direction in physics. It's like it's not a type of physics, it's a thing. Like, like,
Yes, yes.
like it's like, it's
It's
like,
like the Star Trek technobabble a little bit, where
yeah.
there's a word that I know, I'm just going to put them together.
Yes, I think our guy Joseph might be a touch confused, but that's okay.
Okay.
We're gonna roll with it. So they have this very special science. The science requires a um, sort of old, like, religious understanding to work. Um, you can't have he's very clear on this. You can't have a materialist understanding of it. You have to have a sort of like esoteric understanding. And it allows them to build weapons that range from nuclear weapons to uh, plasma rays to torsion scalar devices to even genetic hybrids. So, with this superior weaponry, they leave from the fourth planet, make their way to Mars, and then eventually make their way to Earth. At which point, they essentially, I guess, he probably watched Stargate in the '90s, but essentially enslave the human race, right? So we're part of the labor chain of this galactic empire that stretches from Earth to the moons of Saturn. Now, he argues that this is where the ancient. So this is okay. So Joseph Farrell's theory is basically, it's like the unified field theory of all
Okay.
conspiracy theories,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Everything's involved. JFK, everything from the JFK assassination to ancient aliens, all of it. It's all part of one thing. And so he he explains that these people, these giants, these aliens, they are and the people who watch Ancient Aliens are gonna start nodding their head. They're the Anunnaki, right? The ancient Sumerian gods, but also any ancient god that you find around the world. He says, like, look, this explains why ancient civilizations, be they in China, Africa, America, the Middle East, or Europe, all their ancient gods are always blonde or
Yeah.
redheaded
Yeah.
and white.
Is that even
So,
true?
you
I
see,
don't.
we're going a direction here.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. I don't know much about religion at all, but that seems odd.
I don't think that's true. I don't think that's true at all.
We'll go with it. We'll go with it.
Yeah, I am certainly not a historian of religious texts or anything like that. But I'm a venture a guess that is absolutely not true. But we'll keep going. So, and I have, having looked through some of his books, let's just say the citations are questionable at best when they exist. So, anyways, so they're on Earth, and then all of a sudden there's some sort of uprising on Earth that causes a maybe 1,000-year struggle, right? Where there's uprisings throughout the planetary systems that these aliens control, and they are sort of brutally repressing them. And some of this brutal repression explains, according to Joseph, what you see in the Vedic texts, that's an ancient Indian, like, religious text, right? That has, like, world creation myths and stuff in it. He's saying these are not myths; these are stories of these battles that are happening, as well as in, like, the Epic of Gilgamesh and stories like the Old Testament story of the Flood, right? Um, he at one point has this hilarious line where he just says, "Look, mountains equal planets, eyes equal weapons equals pyramids or ziggurats," and that seems pretty clear to me.
Yeah.
So, so if you're reading an ancient text and they mention a mountain, that's actually a planet. And if they are talking about pyramids or ziggurats, those are weapons. All right. So, next time you see, next time if you happen to go to Egypt and you see the Great Pyramid, make sure you go pew, pew, pew when you're standing next to it to get the effect of what it would be like to be there at its
Yeah. Yeah.
creation. 30,000
Yes.
years ago.
So okay.
Um,
So that can I interrupt? Can the laser? So the pyramids of the laser. I might be jumping way ahead. I'm just. Can it be aimed, or are they stuck in a situation where you have to wait for the planet to just naturally point to where you want to shoot?
oh, this is a good question. So the pyramid, I kind of lied a little bit. It's not just a laser.
Oh,
It has many qualities. All right. The Great Pyramid, according to Mr. Farrell's research, is in fact the Tower of Babel. All right.
oh,
So it has many qualities. One of which is when it's set off by either the humans or some combination of human aliens, they initiate Tower of Babel mode,
okay.
and this prevents the the aliens who built it from understanding their own languages, their own like they it essentially renders them helpless, right? They shoot them with the stroke gun essentially, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Then it turns into, I believe, a plasma ray that shoots the fourth planet. Now, he argues, now he doesn't explicitly say, like, he doesn't ask the question, do you have to get lined up, right? Because, I mean, that's a tough
Hmm,
shot,
hmm.
right? By any estimation.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, he argues that you just have to that basically it just sort of gets the resonance right between the pyramid and the fourth planet or the fourth planet. I'm sorry, not the fourth. I guess that'd be the fifth planet. Jesus, some people are gonna be very upset with me. They keep calling this the fourth planet. The fifth planet, right? The planet between Mars and Jupiter.
Yeah.
But yeah, you have to get the resonance right. So he kind of implies that you don't necessarily have to aim it at it. Maybe you can even shoot it while you're on like different sides of the sun. I don't know. It's a little unclear, but I don't think you necessarily have to aim at it directly. I think you can.
Essentially,
Yeah.
it's almost like that idea of an opera singer breaking the glass.
Yes. 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 It is literally exactly that, but with plasma somehow and all those physics I just mentioned. So okay. And the reason that we can't just open the old pyramid up right now and fire it at something, right? Fire it at our enemies. The reason we can't do that is because in this Tower of Babel moment, um, all the information on how to use this weapon, which again, this information cannot be accessed through material inquiry, right? So it can't be accessed through studying the properties of the weapon or anything like that, right? It has to be accessed through this sort of system of religious languages and practices that essentially get wiped out. All right. And so it's a one and done essentially. They fire it off, and we no longer have access to shoot it off anymore, right? So what ends up happening is there are records, of course, of these various religious practices that you need to fire off the super weapons. And they are called, and I wrote it down in my notes here. Oh, the Tablets of Destiny.
That's like the lost Indiana Jones movie.
Yeah. And so, yeah, I think you're going to find that a lot of these stories have a real movies that came out in the 80s and 90s vibe to it. Yeah. um, so there's these tablets of destiny, which he describes as the software that makes it all work, a religio language. I don't know if that's a real term, but that's what he says. Religio language required to make everything work. Um, so these tablets still exist, and they are apparently either some of them are destroyed, some are hidden, some of the remaining weapons are destroyed, some of the remaining weapons are hidden, etc. Right. So from this point, there's now a sort of one. So the fifth planet is blown up, and it's now the asteroid belt. So home, the home of the aliens, Krypton is gone. So the aliens, they're reeling. The ones that are on Earth are trapped. They go in some cases. So he's a little unclear exactly, but in some cases they go literally underground to maybe a hollow Earth. You know, um, But yeah, so they sort of go underground and they basically start forming societies for one, trying to find the lost weapons, trying to find these tablets of destiny, or trying to discover how to use the weapons again in order to rebuild their empire on Earth. Now, this leads to the creation of secret societies. All right. Now, by the time we get to, say, the Knights Templar or whatever, so many millennia have passed that the aliens have largely interbred with people, right? So they're somewhat indistinguishable between regular people, right? At the same time, the aliens have kind of forgot which sides of the war they're on.
Oh dear.
Right? So it's a little unclear whether these are two separate species of aliens that were also in this combat with the humans, with one of them taking the side of the humans, or if it's the same species and there's just traitors, race traitors or whatever on the side of the humans. A little unclear. I kind of lean towards one species, and just some of them split sides, but they sort of forget what which side's which. This happens. And they decide to start forming secret societies across time to rebuild these various treasures. And the real key here is that Germany is the heart of all these secret societies, right? Whether it be the Knights Templar, again, I don't think that's historically true, but that's okay. The Knights Templar, the Freemasons, or very importantly, the Illuminati.
Oh yeah.
All right.
Yes.
So history is now, this becomes the engine of history, essentially, is this 1,000-year long struggle to refine these weapons and to redominate the world. Its most recent, really important event is World War II, where the Nazis essentially are brought to power via the secret technologies, mind control technologies of these aliens. They use Nazi Germany to scour the earth, mainly the Middle East, looking for the tablets of destiny, looking for these ancient technologies, like in very Indiana Jones. And then they proceed to build some of this stuff, kind of like it's like they're it's like IBM, or I guess it's like Microsoft stealing that original operating system and then just back engineering it, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
They're essentially doing that, right? They're trying to find this stuff and sort of back engineer it into some sort of functional thing, which leads to the creation of the Nazi bell, which is either a weapon or a time machine or a mind control device, or some combination of all three. At which point, of course, the Nazis start to lose the war. These secret societies, the inheritors of this alien technology and whatever, flee Nazi Germany to Latin America and continue building their projects there. And then maybe, just maybe, pop up again in the United States, working on projects in the United States as well.
Oh my gosh.
Which is why when the Roswell crash happens,
Yeah. Yeah.
the yeah, it's got them all, man. When the Roswell crash happens, you know, as Joseph Farrell says, like, look, if this was a weather balloon, why are they bringing all these German scientists to come look at it, right? And of course, he's talking about the German scientists that are at White Sands Missile Range, right? And he's like, because it's not. It's actually the continued work of these secret societies. And of course, after the war, America got its hands on as many German scientists as it could get, who also were in some of these secret societies, and is asking them, like, do you recognize this technology? Can you back engineer it? This leads to the creation of the secret space program in the United States. All right. So we have NASA. That's for us. That's for the chumps,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
And we have the real space program. All right. And as Farrell says, by was it 67 or 68 when they go to the moon? By that point, when NASA's going to the moon, uh, the secret space program, they can go have lunch on the moon, right, and be back. So yeah, I know, totally, right. So the secret space program was almost discovered by JFK.
Oh my.
And apparently they were worried he might blow the lid off the whole joint. So they had to blow his lid off instead. Yeah, that's whatever. Fuck JFK sucked. But anyways, the point being is this is where the Kennedy assassination comes in. Now, at the same time, there is a geographically separate operation of these Nazis in Latin America, largely in Argentina, Chile, and Brazil, who are, with the help of the various states there, pursuing these various weapons projects as well. And basically, Farrell's big bomb that he drops is, guess what? They're all working, no matter where they are geographically, they're working on these projects together. We think we have the tiger by the tail, when we bring all these German scientists over, but in fact, they're using our resources, but building their own Fourth Reich or whatever. Just to bring it up to date with sort of where we are in the moment. He essentially, the war in Iraq is fully plotted by these secret societies, right? Skull and Bones, by the way, is another one.
Okay.
Which he says, like, look, Skull and Bones secret society. If you look at the SS, they also have Skull and Bones on their logo. So same thing.
Okay.
Same. Sure. Why not? Right. Doesn't say anything about pirates. So I don't know if that's all related too, but anyways, the Skull and Bones, this is one of these secret societies run by aliens, which honestly maybe is right. But the second war in Iraq, I always like to remind people that there was another one in 91.
Yes.
But the second war in Iraq, I think Farrell forgets about 91 as well, was about essentially it was a raiding mission, which a lot of different parties were involved in, to try and capture, maybe some of this old technology and maybe some of these tablets if they're available.
Yeah. So I'm still stuck on the Roswell thing. So was this a different alien species or like who?
No. So this was what they think, or what he suggests. These were the societies in Latin America who had basically already begun, these Nazi remnants in Latin America had already begun their own space program. And this was one of their ships, essentially, that either crashed or was somehow shot down over New Mexico. And basically his assertion is when the military gets there, they instantly recognize that the craft is German or Nazi in origin, right? And that's why they bring in the German scientists, and they're like, look upon your deeds and tell us, right?
Yeah.
So,
yeah. You might not be able to answer this question, but do you remember any mention of a group in Argentina called the Friendship Group?
Oh, no, he doesn't mention the Friendship Group.
Okay.
He is stuck on the, again, fucking movies, The Boys of Brazil, and oh
yes, okay.
Oh, in Argentina, there's one. It's not the Friendship Group. What group is it? They build a town and stuff. I mean, it should be stated, the stuff about like Nazis and is all true. Like,
yeah.
Like,
yeah. That's why it's a little bit difficult because you're like, well, yeah.
Yeah, the stuff about Nazis in Latin America is all true. That a ton of Nazis went to Latin America with the full knowledge of the governments that were, harboring them, as well as I think upwards of 20 to 30,000 Nazi literal war criminals went to the United States, and they did form the basis of the American space program. Even the United States harbored them, and the story has always been that we needed them for the Cold War or whatever. But huge numbers of the ones they brought over were like camp guards from Treblinka and stuff. I mean, people who didn't really have, it's a little hard to argue what their value was.
Yeah.
Other than like the, CIA and the War Department just liked them. Like,
Mhm.
like these are cool guys.
Yep. Yeah.
Can't have them getting killed out there. Got to bring them back.
You only have a handful of like irreplaceable rocket scientists, right? You don't have, maybe a dozen,
Yeah, I mean, and really, I mean, all that science was like pretty easy to back engineer and was like well understood. Like Werner von Braun was not needed for to have a space program. As by the way, the Soviets proved when their space program was much more advanced than the US's and didn't rely on German scientists.
Hmm.
Now,
Yeah.
you know, it's very funny because Farrell does mention that the Soviets were also going into Germany and picking up their scientists too. And I was like, yeah, what did they do to them? Because most of them were, ended up at the end of a rope as opposed to at the end of a desk, in New Mexico.
Yes.
But yeah, I mean, all that stuff's very true. My dad was actually was at White Sands. He was in the army, was at White Sands in the late 60s, early 70s. And even then, he has to, because he was an officer, right? He'd have to go watch the experiments because technically all the scientists are civilian. And so whenever they're doing something, there has to be a representative from the military there, right? So they just send low-ranking officers to go stand there, usually in a phone booth, while the scientists dawdle around doing whatever, right? And so my dad would tell these stories to me as a kid, which I never really thought twice about all the German scientists and him having to sit there, and they'd all just be talking in German. Just like sit in the phone booth, like whatever. I guess they're doing whatever they're gonna do, right? Just sitting here. I don't know that my dad ever put it together they were Nazis. I don't know. My dad's could be a little oblivious sometimes. So, but they were definitely there. And then actually in Houston, there was a big one of the space medicine research facilities, huge facility, was actually named after a concentration camp
Oh
doctor
my.
from Nazi Germany because he came over and became the head of like the American Space Medicine Program. And this was a guy who, in his free time when he was at the concentration camp, he used to like to take camp prisoners and would just throw them in icy water and just sit there and watch and see how long it would take them to either freeze to death
Good
or
God.
drown, like just
Oh
at the
my
time
God.
went.
Yeah.
So I hope NASA got all the good research from them they could.
Yeah. I
Um,
don't think that people acknowledge enough, as far as conspiracy theories go, why it's such fertile ground in the US, right? It's really fertile ground in the US because we've lied. Well, maybe not we, but the government has lied about so much stuff for so
yeah,
many years. It's ripe for any wild theory.
yeah, and I think this kind of gets to the interesting point of Joseph Farrell. I keep saying he's like this kind of kooky guy or whatever. No, this guy is doing well. Like he puts out like 3 books a year. They all sell. He does conferences and stuff. He is not working basically. Like he's not doing a 9 to 5, right? And so he's doing just fine. And I think part of it is that, I this is where we get back to sort of the Iraq war and some of the truther stuff. But like I think in the US, because you're not really allowed to talk about politics in a lot of ways, right? Like
Hmm.
in any substantive manner, right?
Yeah.
All you can do is talk about the difference between the infinitesimal difference between, whatever milk toast Democrat and milk toast Republican might be running against each other. But you're not really allowed to have like substantive conversations about policy, particularly things like foreign policy. Like, it's just either you're all in or that's it, right? And so I think things like 9/11, things like the war in Iraq were really hard for people to metabolize absent any sort of political narrative that they were familiar with, right? That could tell them what was happening, right? They'd always believed that the US were the good guys. They'd, believe this was the end of history and that like the era of like big wars and stuff was over. I mean, of course, all that was bullshit, but I mean, people believed it. And when 9/11 happened, I mean, Jason, I think you're probably, a little bit close to my, I won't say you're as old as me, but close to my age. So you're probably like of a adult-ish age when 9/11 happened, right?
Oh yeah.
So
Yeah.
you remember, I mean, it's very shocking to everybody. Like, probably much more than it would be today if it happened today. Like it was a real thing. And I think people just had a really hard time understanding how it could happen. I remember one of the biggest things that I would notice from people that were in the 9/11 truth movement that they would always want to harp on is like, the US is, this great big military. It's so powerful. How could this have happened unless they let it happen? It's like, well, yeah, I mean, but it's like doesn't take much to get a plane and fly it into like, and what can you do about that, right? Like there's not really like a defense mechanism for that or anything. And at the same time, too, like our military is also largely incompetent. Our bureaucracy is largely incompetent. Uh, you know, we didn't have the Iraq war to look at the time, but it's like, all look at Vietnam, and like every military conflict post World War II is like generally pretty incompetent. Um, so, but people like, I mean, that really was a shock. I mean, people used to just sit there and yell, like, "Do you really think just some guys in a cave did this?" Which is like showed the racism of the time.
Yes. Yeah.
Uh, but also, like, I mean, it's like, what? Learn, took flying lessons and hijacked a plane with a box. None of this is like rocket science. I mean, that's why it worked, right? You know, they weren't busy. Look, I mean, we put all our best scientists on the F-35, and the plane literally shoots itself with its own machine gun, right? The best plans are the simple ones, right? It's a very simple plan, right? This is, I don't see what's so hard about believing that somebody could do this unless you bought into the mythology, right? Of the US as this great, powerful country, right? And with the war in Iraq, I think similarly, I mean, there was just that whole thing on Twitter with that person saying, trying to tell people like, oh, if you were alive in 2003, you would have believed in WMDs as well. And it's like, well, I was alive at the time. I was in Lubbock, Texas at the time too. I wasn't like in New York or fucking LA or Seattle, right? I was in fucking Lubbock, Texas, West Texas. And nobody there believed it. like nobody believed that. Like nobody bought the WMD thing, which again is what there was so much dissonance around Iraq, particularly once it started to go bad, which was almost immediately. And it's one of those things like if you're winning, people kind of forget all the lies and shit that got you to that point. But once it goes bad, everybody starts to ask these questions like, why the fuck are we doing here? Like, what was the whole point of any of this, right? And it didn't make a lot of sense to a lot of people. So they were searching for sort of narratives. And I think that what a guy like Joseph Farrell does is he provides this grand narrative that takes the chaos of the world, right? And it puts it into this really succinct sort of like series of events, right? A series of if thens, right? And at the same time, it's a grand narrative, but it's a grand narrative that doesn't really challenge anything. Right? There's nothing for you to do in it, right? It's kind of like QAnon. Like you're purely a viewer, right? So if I was pitching you during the Iraq War, the grand narrative, if I was pitching you the immortal science of Marxism Leninism, it'd be like, look, there's this thing called capitalism, there's a thing called imperialism, right? There's a declining rate of profit. If I start pitching that to you, yeah, it's a narrative that puts all the chaotic events of the world into some sort of structure, right? That makes them understandable. But at the same time, it also kind of calls on you to do something like, like, oh, I gotta at least oppose the war at the very least, right? Which was not an easy task at the time. I mean, you really could get into a lot of trouble, right, if you did that. Whereas this narrative, oh, there's a secret race of millennia old aliens who've been living on Earth way in advance of us, secretly pulling all the strings. Well, cool. I guess I'll keep my eye on that. But I mean, what are you gonna do, right? you know,
Yeah.
we already blew up the fifth planet. Can't do it again, right? So like
Yeah.
yes. So it's a little, I think that kind of like Q, it's nice because it gives order to the world, and then the cherry on top is it also excuses you for not
Mhm,
doing anything
mhm.
about it.
Well, it's also very convenient if your worldview is kind of accepting capitalism and kind of our imperialist system as being a natural kind of given that's never even been examined, right? It's too far out of the box to even think about.
Yeah, you never have to step on the landmines that you're taught from birth in this country, not to talk about and not to think about, right? Which is you never are supposed to think about what the US does overseas, right? You're never supposed to think about why the wars that we have happen, right? And again, I mean, it all sounds crazy from our standpoint today because so much has happened between now and 2003. But I remember talking to this guy who was a Marine in probably about 2004 or 2005, right? Doing the Standard War thing. And this guy came up to me, he was a Marine. And he was telling me, he's like, look, I was in the actual like invasion of Iraq, right? And and he's like, I remember he's like, in my unit, we literally had this guy, he was like an oil like surveying engineer or some bullshit like that. And the thing was, they were about to roll through some oil fields, and their job was to basically so that when they got to the oil fields, he could, start doing his thing, like, and figuring out, like, like they're bringing in all these experts, right, to essentially go and figure out like what they're going to do with these oil fields, how to, get them running again, and all this kind of shit, which was not for the benefit of the Iraqi people, right? And so this guy's telling me the story. And he's like, I wanted to believe all this shit, but like, he's like, they tell you all this stuff and you believe it, and they tell you it over and over again before they send you over. And then when you get over there, they tell you it again, right? We're fighting for the freedom of the Iraqi people. Funny that even he like didn't mention WMDs in any way. Like literally nobody believed that at the time. But they all believe that we're going to democratize Iraq and we're going to fight for the freedom of the Iraqi people, right? And that was the thing that people actually
Or
believed.
what is the line? The line is that Saddam Hussein was a bad dude, and it's good we got rid of him.
Yep.
Like, well,
Yep.
yeah.
Yep. Yep, bad dude. Of course, worse than Hitler. It's like, well, I mean, at some point, I feel like you're just rehabilitating Hitler at this point. But
Too true. Too true.
yeah, but but yeah, and he's telling me, it's like, I believed all this stuff and I was told all this stuff. And of course he did. He was like, 19 years old or whatever. And he's like, and then I get there and like, I got to give Shell Oil a piggyback ride like into the country. He's like, it's a little hard to believe you're there for all the high minded notions when this is what you're doing. Right. And of course, I mean, the whole reason why the Baghdad museum got looted, I mean, there is a good story or an interesting and very sad story there, was that the US was in Baghdad when that museum got looted. Like US soldiers were in Baghdad, but they were busy securing the oil ministry. Like there was this, I remember from the time, there was this amazing side by side picture of the Baghdad Archaeological Museum. And it's all the windows are busted out. Like there's just shit all down the fucking stairs, like just totally fucking destroyed. And then there is a picture side by side next to of the oil ministry, and it's surrounded by U.S. troops and is in pristine condition. And it's like, these are choices, right? We're making choices clearly. And one was and the choice was save the oil ministry at all costs. The priceless and completely irreplaceable relics of our human existence, fuck them. Like let them get destroyed, let them get lost to time, all this kind of stuff. And I mean, of course, this isn't the worst tragedy that happens in Iraq. I mean, 600,000 people are dead by 2006 in the war. But it is a tragedy, and this is a narrative that allows you to get
Mhm.
around that, where you don't have to think about
Yeah.
that,
Yeah.
right? Now it's just a fun spy story that you can, tell talk with your friends about and speculate about and all that kind of stuff. But you're not called to do anything.
Yeah. And I think that sometimes these stories are popular because they serve certain, well, now I'm going to sound like a paranoid. They serve certain masters, if you will, right? Is that, book publishers are much more willing to publish a book like this, maybe, than a book that's actually critiquing the capitalist motivations of the invasion.
Yeah, yeah, of course, yeah. I mean, for instance, uh, there was plenty of people like going on media or whatever, telling fanciful conspiracy theories, getting books published and stuff at the time. Whereas Ward Churchill, who's like, yeah, this is about capitalism and the 9/11 attacks, like we were the bad guys in that too, gets a tenured professor literally gets like fired from his job in a very public like show trial at the University of Colorado. And I mean, that was the sort of tenor at the time, right? Is that any criticism, the only critical voice on media at the time, which was Phil Donahue, hilariously on MSNBC. Again, another blast from the past that nobody's going to remember
Yeah.
that Phil Donahue was
Yeah.
on MSNBC. Literally the only on any channel on any show, he was the only voice that was like, "Hey guys, I think the Iraq War might be a bad idea." And it wasn't even like because of imperialism. Like he was just like, "I just think it's a bad idea," and they fired him. Like there's a reason why you don't think of Phil Donahue as being on MSNBC, right? They fired him, and that was sort of the atmosphere, right? So I remember at the time I went to this event on campus at Texas Tech that was all about chemical weapons or whatever, because this was after the invasion. And people don't remember this either, but we were supposed to invade Syria next and then Iran afterwards, right? And so this was a presentation by some idiot professor about how, of course, there was no WMDs in Iraq, but there's definitely going to be some in Syria. So obviously, we're going to be invading Syria next week. So let's talk about that. And I remember going there like as like very honestly. I didn't know much about it. I wasn't like a red diaper baby or anything. I didn't know anything about any of this stuff. I was learning as I went. And so I went to like seriously engage the discourse, if you will. And I just remember being like, I mean, this I just remember telling him, I was like, this just sounds like BS. Like I'm sorry, like your story doesn't like sound right, doesn't make sense. And also like why invade Syria at all? It's like it seems like what's going on in Iraq's already a disaster. And the guy just lit it was hilarious because it was like an ice cream. This is so stupid. It was an ice cream social, basically, right? So they had like little ice creams, right? And he got up and just started berating me and he was yelling at me all these things, which I didn't even know at the time. Like, I come to find out later, but he was just yelling out, like, I bet you think we, overthrew the government of Guatemala because of bananas. And at the time, I'm like, wait, is this happening right now? Like, I have no, he's talking about 54, obviously, in the overthrow of John Jacob Arbenz, but like, I literally had no idea what he was talking about at the time. And he took my ice cream away. I was a bad participant in the group and I had
Oh,
to
he
go.
took your ice cream away.
But I mean, this is like a very silly, definitely not the worst thing that happened to anybody in any of these situations, but just to show the utter insanity of the time. And yeah, enter a guy like Joseph Farrell. Of course, you can publish this nonsense and nobody's going to care, right? Because it doesn't actually like threaten anything in any way. And that's what he did. Now, I think the problem with this is that there are some little embedded little tidbits into his theory because, of course, he's Joseph Farrell. He's a con man, right? He's making this up. He's a grifter, right? And as he's making this theory up, he's just sort of fitting it onto the skeleton of other popular tales. And in it, he inserts the stuff. And I mean, because I think one thing you could say is, oh, it's just people having fun. Let people enjoy things, right? We could do the meme, right? But his obsession with Nazis and Nazi weaponry is, I think, a very unhealthy thing that is very common in America, which is to overly glorify and fantasize about the Third Reich. And as a kid who grew up in Texas but had parents from the North, my parents were very obsessed in a very typical American way of going to Civil War battlefields. I remember going and getting all these, Southern, tales of the Civil War of like, oh, the South was so brave. They were the best fighters, all this bullshit. And I just remember several times, like when we go to these things, asking my parents, like, well, the South was like so good and everything. Like, why didn't they win? And of course, every once in a while, like a tour guide would intervene to be like, oh, it's just because the New York or the New York, the North was better at producing things and they were just able to out manufacture the South. And I was like, well, I mean, it's funny as a kid. I was like, well, that seems like a kind of important part of war then. I don't know. But only to find out later, which my parents kind of, because they bought all the Dunning School shit. That's what they were taught as kids too, except for the fact that because they're from Indiana, they at least thought the North was the good guys in the war, right? They were at least happy the North won. Whereas you go to some of the stuff and you'd feel like it was the opposite. And I remember growing up and then, actually I avoided Civil War history like the plague because of all this stuff as a kid. But when I actually started looking at it and being like, oh no, like the Confederacy is like literally some of the dumbest people on the planet were running it. Completely incompetent, generals, right? Like they lost for a wide host of reasons, mostly that they are fucking idiots, and it was a predetermined conclusion from the get. And I feel like a similar lost cause thing has happened in the U.S. with Nazism, right? Where there is this romantic reimagining of Nazi Germany as being this all powerful country. It had all these super weapons, oh, their army is so good at fighting, blah, all this horse shit. And it's just like, well, one, if that were true, I guess they probably would have won, wouldn't they? Right. But turns out they didn't, right? But the thing is, all this is allowed to exist because, of course, in American history, you're not allowed to talk about who actually fought the Nazis, which was the Soviet Union. So you already that's off the table. You're not allowed to discuss that. And at the same time, the U.S. had to explain why, goddamn Nazi scientist is on the Walt Disney Science Hour on TV talking to kids, right? You know, why every time somebody from NASA talks, they always got a German accent, right? I mean, you got to explain this, and you begin with oh well, there's good Nazis and bad Nazis. That's where it begins, and all of a sudden they all become good Nazis over time, right? And in essence, Joseph Farrell's continuing this, right? So he's continuing the good Nazi sort of diatribe. He, continues to play on these sort of race themes of the Nazis as this technological superpower, which by the way is absolutely false. It's all made up. Anybody's listening to this, that's all bullshit. Um, Hilariously, Nazism was actually like a very anti-technology political bent as well. Like, it was a revolt. It was a revolt against the machine. There's a British journalist and communist at the time in the 1930s named Rajani Palm Dutt, who wrote a book called Fascism and Social Revolution. It's actually very good. And in it, he sort of talks about this, where he's like, look, this is a revolt against the machine. This is why the Nazis, this is why Hitler wants to essentially level Berlin and then rebuild a new city on it called Germania that's going to look like his imaginings of Bavaria, like under Rome or something. It's like it's looking to the past, not to the future, right? Like everything about it is thoroughly reactionary. And in fact, like its ability to pursue its quote unquote super weapons was thoroughly hampered by the fact that it was anti-science, essentially, right? Like, they didn't believe in the like Jewish physics of Einstein or whatever. So, that kind of hampers you on your weapons, right? Weapons creation. Now, thankfully, right? So they only killed the millions of people they did kill, and all the people they killed in all the old simple ways that everybody kills everybody on this fucking planet, right? Didn't require secret weapons. But yeah, so some of that in there, and then the other big thing is, so along with that rehabilitation of Nazism, he also has this. There's no other way to describe it other than race theory that cuts through all of this, which is at one point in one of the interviews, I remember this like really like hit my ear when I first heard it. But to this day, I can still like hear it in my mind. But basically, he tells the interviewer that he's doing this interview with, he's like, you know, um, because the aliens intermingled or whatever, he's like, they did DNA tests and they found out that Africans are the most human people on the planet. Like they have the most pure human DNA, and that Europeans have the least pure human DNA. And then he's like, because it's got all that alien DNA in it, right? And the thing is, if you think about the sort of cosmology that he's laying out here, the aliens are a superior race, superior technology, superior presumably physically, right? They're larger, they're whatever, right? And all this. And he just instantly just attributes that to the Europeans. It's like, yep, they got all that, they got all the good stuff. It wasn't like, oh, the Europeans are less like, a true thing, like the Europeans have more Neanderthal DNA. Like he wasn't saying that. Like he's like, no, they got more Superman fucking DNA in them. and he goes on this extended thing, which actually is in his book Babylon's Banksters, which will tell you about where that's going. But he talks about how the fall of Rome actually comes because the Romans were interbreeding with their slaves too much. And to quote him, their blood became 99% Oriental, which caused the regime to fall. And his use of terms like Oriental and stuff isn't, I mean, the man's not particularly old, uh, although his brain is apparently, but I think it is very much, and this is to get like very kind of academic-y. So, but I think he very much means it in the Edward Said sense of like Oriental versus Occidental, right? Like, the Roman Empire falls because they bring in all this foreign sort of wild blood, right? Which of course makes them unable to do things like run efficient bureaucracies or whatever that the European is supposedly good at. Um, and then he sort of traces this through Babylon's Banksters, this idea of like this Oriental sort of blood, and it becomes this sort of like taint in the European bloodline I mean, this is so fucking gross, but that ultimately manifests itself in the form of the Rothschilds and the Rothschild, and you know where it goes from there, right? So, international banking conspiracy, etc. Right? Um,
Well, it seems that that's the case. Then wouldn't the Rothschilds be the actual protectors of humanity, and all these other people would be the evil
the
aliens?
fact that his race science is extremely confused. Look, are the Europeans mainly aliens, or are they like Oriental or whatever? It all seems extremely confused. I think he's very confused. um,
And wouldn't this show up somehow? Everyone's doing all these DNA tests now. Wouldn't we have shown up? Shouldn't that chart say you are 25% alien?
yeah,
Congratulations.
you would think that this would hurt his flow a little bit. And I actually did check up on what Joseph's been up to these days, and he's as prolific as ever. I have not seen any information from him about yeah, the use of 23andMe and whether that's caused him to change his thoughts on any of this. That seems to have not popped up very much. Um, but there's also little things in there too, like the Latin American Nazi program is supposedly being run by Martin Bormann. I mean, he's writing these books in like I think he starts writing them in the early aughts. And, Martin Bormann was confirmed, like his corpse was confirmed in Berlin in like the early 70s. Like we know what happened to Martin Bormann, right? Like, things like talking about the Nazi bell. Everybody knows the Nazi bell is not real. Like it was literally made up in 2000. Like, I mean, just total nonsense. So, I mean, a lot of the stuff that he's talking about is like just patently false, right? I mean, beyond the alien shit, but yeah, it's just patently false. But none of that seems to bother him in any way. So, a lack of consistency, I don't think, is necessarily an issue in his story.
How do you lose a war if you have a time machine? That seems like kind of a secret
It
key.
seems like the ultimate weapon.
Yes.
It seems like the ultimate weapon. I mean, and it was kind of funny because in explaining, he obviously, I think he, like any good Hollywood screenwriter, knows that you just avoid time travel narratives at all costs, right? It seems tempting, but it's always a bad place. And so with the bell, he focuses largely on this idea that it has these like mind control powers. And he talks about how, like, oh yeah, do you ever notice that sometimes people all over the world will all of a sudden just get sad at once? Like he's like, if you're ever walking around and you start to feel some sort of emotion that doesn't make sense, like again, like you're sad but you're not a manic depressive or whatever, it's probably just the bell working on you. And as he says, he's like, nothing can beat like human gumption and will, so you just gotta pray the bell away, I guess. Pray the um and it'll make it go away. And again, I mean, this is like a very convenient look. People are sad, people are depressed, like, and it usually isn't because you have some sort of chemical imbalance or something. It's usually because your life sucks, and living in this country sucks, like all this kind of stuff, right? And this is a very convenient sort of way out of all that. That he writes for you. I get that Joseph Farrell's not sad. I mean, this seems like a pretty cool gig. Honestly, I'm a little jealous. I wish I had thought of it, but for normal people though, like, this is not the like it's every day is increasingly not the best time. And this is a convenient way out. And it kind of gets to this weird religiosity that exists in some of these communities too. The UFO community specifically, which is very strange. But Joseph Farrell a lot of times, comes off as a mix of, I think when he wants to sound like highfalutin or whatever, he comes off as some sort of like Catholic of a Thomas Aquinas bent, right? Like like a year 900 Catholic or something. And then at other times comes off as like this bizarre evangelical who has never read a story in the Bible they didn't think was literally true and happened. Um, and that's a strange American bent to have as far as religion goes. And it's honestly like fairly rife in the UFO community, which is something I never quite had a handle on until I went to the first ever alien convention, or Alien Con, and in San Jose. and in Silicon Valley, and sitting through all these, what I thought, hey, let's have a fun time. I went with some friends from work, and it's like, let's have a fun time joking about aliens, and like we're all here to have fun. And one, like, there's a huge part of the crowd there that is clearly searching for something. They're very lost, I think, emotionally, spiritually, intellectually lost, very lonely. Like I remember when the Ancient Aliens panel, which had all the talking heads from Ancient Aliens, including Tsoukalos, but had all the talking heads up there. When they were taking questions, like everybody that would go up, like I shit you not, like every other question was, I was like tossed out of my parish because I kept asking questions about aliens, and like my family won't talk to me, and like, do you know of any like religious groups where you can go to and have these sort of conversations? To which, of course, everybody on that stage is like just a con man who's selling them something. So they go, I don't really know about that, but like, my company does tours of various alien sites. If you want to see that, it was actually really depressing. The whole thing was very sad, but there was this like element of like sort of lost evangelicals who like didn't have a place in the world, right? Because American evangelicism is very much just like a religion of being middle class, and these are people who probably were falling out of the middle class for various reasons and found themselves like, sort of on the outs, right? And religion for most people is like their community that they actually have conversations with and stuff. And you just had these people that were just very like sad and very sort of isolated. And you know, it kind of like ruined me on some of the stuff for the how fun it was. Like I used to be a very avid like ancient alien watcher, but I just sort of saw these guys like conning these people essentially, like just just taking their money, man, and not really giving them much in return. And it was really sad. And I don't know what quite to make of all that. Yeah, I just spit a whole bunch out at you, and I don't know really what to make of all that, other than the fact that I saw it, like it definitely exists, and I'm not really sure why why they've gravitated to this, like but it's definitely there.
Yeah, I think like more to that point is one thing that really disturbs me is I've been watching this field for decades, and I've seen this kind of stuff happen over and over again, and the idea of disclosure being kind of an analog to the second coming of Jesus,
Yes.
where
Yeah.
it's like this event that's coming, everything's going to change, I'm going to be proven right, everything's going to be different.
Mhm.
It's very similar.
Yeah. And I mean, even the aliens themselves and sort of Farrell's cosmology are something. I mean, literally directly, he says, is something akin to angels too, which is this sort of out, right? Of okay, maybe in a world where God is dead, and I don't mean that in like necessarily the like silly high school way, but in a way that like the community of the church is dead, right? The aliens, maybe there's this other force outside of us that can come save me, because these people feel powerless, right? They feel unable to do much of anything. And yeah, and I think the disclosure stuff, I mean, again, this all this stuff is of a type, right? Because it's pulling a lot of the same people in, very similar to QAnon, right? They gravitate to it because they're socially isolated. Being a part of it makes them even more socially isolated. The community they do have is not one that is um it's not one that is essentially like loving. It's not one that is going both directions in any way, right? It just takes, and it sort of like sucks it out of them. And the longer they're in it, like the more it sort of sucks anything out of them that that they had. And that's sort of what I saw when I was an alien. I like I said, I mean, it really like soured me on a lot of this stuff. It made me really angry about a lot of these people. And people like George Tsoukalos and some of these other people that are taking advantage of these people is really depressing and really sad. George Tsoukalos did this breakfast where it's like a meet and greet, right? Where you could have breakfast with George, right? Uh it's in this giant, of course I got tickets now. And it's in this giant banquet room. It's probably like 200 people in there. And the whole thing is like he's going to give a quick, spiel or whatever. You can ask him questions, and then there's going to be a meet and greet afterwards where you can get him to sign something, right? Very cool, right? So, one, me and my friend that went to this were wildly hungover, so we're already in a bad mood for this. But we show up, and George, of course, shows up fucking late, right? He shows up late. He gives some like rambling talk for like 5 or 10 minutes, and then he asks people, "Oh, go and take questions now." And he kind of just like blows off whatever the questions anybody asks are, and he just talks about whatever dumb thing he's selling, right? So he does these tours, he's selling videos, right? All this stuff. Um, and he's basically just kind of redirected everything to whatever he's selling, right? And granted, the questions are all weird and they're all like, I don't know, some really aren't questions or whatever. But whatever. These are your fans, right? This is the fan base you built, right? And when it finishes, they line everybody up to do this meet and greet or whatever. And I remember we got like towards the back of the line because it's like, look, I'm not gonna go stampede myself to go meet this guy, right? But we line up towards the back of the line, and as it's going, I see that George is continually talking to his like handler or whatever, and eventually they probably got like halfway through the line, and he just cuts it off and he just walks away, and the handler tells everybody like, "Oh, sorry, George is gonna go to another thing. So sorry, bye." Like, and by the way, this wasn't cheap. Like, it was like $100 or whatever per ticket to go this. So it's not like cheap. And so they just push everybody out, right? And of course, people are like upset, but they're like upset in this way that is very funny. They're like trying to figure out what could have happened schedule wise or whatever. And it's like, no, he just didn't want to talk to you guys anymore. He'd had enough. And the funny part was I think they must have realized on something like, okay, this is maybe a mistake. We made a mistake. So like later that day, they announce or tell people like, hey, George is gonna do an autograph session like later this afternoon, and they have like a little signing pit, like you have at conventions. Like George is gonna do an autograph session like 4, right? So again, my friend really wants we had gotten the George Nori autograph, so he really wanted a Tsoukalos autograph, right? So yeah, I'm totally sad I didn't go looking for it. I'll see if I can find it, but I actually have my AlienCon pass signed by George Nori, but
Oh, wow. All right.
very cool guy, by the way. Unlike Tsoukalos, George Nori, extremely cool. He just walked around the entire time, talked to everybody, took photos with everybody. Extremely cool guy, whatever. Um, but yeah, so everybody lines up, right? So we get in the stupid line all crunched in. And hilariously, there was these two guys in front of me in line that had just clearly met in line and were going back and forth about their various alien theories. And one of the guys starts on the other guy about like Bigfoot and whether or not Bigfoot's like an interdimensional creature or whatever.
Hmm.
And in literally the most dismissive tone possible, the guy responds to him as just like, I don't go in for that whole Bigfoot thing. And I was like, motherfucker, did you just listen to yourself in the last 3 years? But anyways, that's neither here nor there. But the point being is that George never shows up.
Oh,
So everybody waits, it was at like, like again, we'll say 4. It's at like 4. Everybody waits till like 4:30 before, which clearly means the events like hosts are trying to find them, right? And they eventually just call it off, right? And I was like, I mean, it just sucked. Like the whole thing sucked. And it just made me feel really bad because, like I said, a lot of these people, for me, I don't care, right? I'm just there for the lulz, right? But me and my friends were definitely in the minority in that crowd. Like people were really searching for something. They had invested a lot into this stuff, and they didn't think it was silly. They took it seriously, and it was just sad that these people that they gave their money to, I thought, the majority of them pretty flagrantly treated them like trash, and it was kind of sad, but yeah, that's sort of a long way to the was going on. I guess was and to the say I don't know that I have a fully wrap my head around any of this, but that was just sort of my experience with it.
my last question is going to be a little bit lighter.
Yeah, yeah.
So
But
these aliens.
I'll tell you a funny.
Okay, yeah.
I'll tell you. I'll give you one quick. Since you brought the disclosure project thing, it is kind of funny. Right before I watched this, I got up at like 1 a.m. today because I bought all this cheap brisket at of Fred Meyer. So I was like smoking brisket at 1 a.m. So yeah, so I've been like just up, just watching dumb stuff on YouTube and stuff. And there was a new Disclosure Project documentary just came out called Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind. Anybody who hasn't watched it, if you are at all familiar with the alien scene, you should definitely watch it because the whole video is basically them trying to argue that the To the Stars Academy, which is the one that the guy from Blink 182 created to also look at aliens, the entire video is them essentially making the case that those guys are some sort of CIA op. So it's essentially a Twitter feud where they're just calling them an op the entire time, because I think the To the Stars Academy made their own disclosure documentary just recently too. So yeah, very mad that their toes are getting stepped on in the grifting world of aliens. Very funny though.
Yeah, I have to check that out. I won't get into the whole To the Stars Academy, but I don't. I think I've been very public before about not trusting them, not because I think they're government agents, but because I think that they're just not on the up and up, I'll say.
Yeah, you probably should not trust the guy from Blink 182 with your money, with any like thoughts on anything.
Yeah, mainly it was because when he was asking for, I won't get into it, but when he was asking for investors, I read his paperwork and I was very, very disturbed by what I read.
Yes. Yes. These guys are grifters, man. They're grifters.
So my kind of lighthearted final question is just that, these aliens, they were able to destroy a whole planet without any real apparent negative consequence to the rest of the solar system or the Earth. So let's say we're firing up the pyramid and you get to decide which planet to blow up. Which one are you blowing up?
Ooh, that's a good question.
You can include moons if you want.
No, I'll leave the moons alone. If you hit the planet, you're going to get the moons, I feel like. So, I'll leave the moons alone. I kind of felt like Neptune never really had a point. Like we already got Pluto. It's Pluto's further out. It seems like it's probably icier. It's smaller. Like, what's the point of Neptune? Let's just get rid of it. And I've always been kind of partial to Mercury, so I'm definitely keeping that. But keeping Mercury, getting rid of Neptune.
All right. Well, now you're gonna be canceled on Neptune. They're gonna be all very upset about this.
Oh no, we're gonna lose some subscribers.
Well, thank you so much for your time today and for just this amazing conversation and this story. It's been delightful. If people want to learn more about you and your work and your projects and stuff, where should they go?
All right. Well, you can listen to the Mechanical Freak podcast on any major downloading site, Spotify, Apple, or iTunes, etc. You can also find us at mechanicalfreak.website. And yes, we are, in fact, the formerly Seattle Sucks podcast. Why did we change our name? I don't know. We're idiots.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you, Jason. This has been great.
I'm Jason Rigdon, and you have been listening to episode number 18 of the Podcast of Mystery, originally transmitted on
Friday, June 18th, 2021.
If you want more information about me, the show, or my guests, please visit podcastofmystery.com. Tune in next Monday when I will be talking to conspiracy theorist George Hobbs of the Fact Hunter podcast. This is sure to be a very controversial episode. If you have a guest or a topic that you would like to hear on this show, please email podofmystery@gmail.com. You can also send any feedback or comments to that same address. This audio program is copyrighted by me, Jason Rigdon, in 2021 and is freely available under the Creative Commons Attribution License.